The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, cold metal biting into skin that had never felt steel before. Maya Kingsley, straight-A student, debate team captain, daughter of one of the most powerful judges in the state, stood in the center of Brookwood High's courtyard, surrounded by a sea of silent, staring faces. Officer Loren tightened the cuffs with deliberate force, his knuckles whitening as he twisted. "Make them tighter, Dad," Evan sneered from beside him, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "She needs to learn what happens when people like her step out of line." 20 minutes earlier, Maya had been just another new student navigating unfamiliar hallways. Now she was being paraded like a criminal, her blue hoodie trembling with each shallow breath, her dignity under assault in front of 300 witnesses. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, turning the moment into something theatrical, almost surreal. Students pressed their phones against the windows of the main building, recording everything. Some looked horrified. Others looked away. No one intervened. "You people need to understand your place," Officer Loren muttered, his breath hot against her ear as he shoved her forward. Maya stumbled but didn't fall. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Her mind raced through the events that had led here, the deliberate shoulder check in the hallway, Evan's racist taunts, the scattered books, the rising confrontation. She'd stood her ground. She'd refused to apologize for existing in a space that clearly didn't want her. And somehow, that defiance had escalated into this nightmare. Evan circled her like a predator enjoying its prey, his Letterman jacket swaying with each step. "What's wrong? Not so tough now, are you?" His eyes gleamed with something beyond simple cruelty. This was power, the intoxicating rush of watching someone break under the weight of a system rigged in his favor. His father's badge wasn't just protection. It was a weapon, and Evan wielded it with the carelessness of someone who'd never faced consequences. What Evan didn't know, what neither of them could possibly imagine, was that Maya's mother wasn't just any judge. Judge Patricia Kingsley presided over the very district court that had jurisdiction over Officer Loren's precinct. She'd built her reputation on exposing corrupt officers, dismantling abuse of power, and refusing to bend to political pressure. She was known, respected, and feared. And right now, she had absolutely no idea her daughter was being humiliated 50 miles away at a school that was supposed to be safe. The crowd parted as Officer Loren dragged Maya toward his patrol car, parked prominently at the school's main entrance like this was all planned, like this was a show of force designed to send a message. Maya's eyes scanned the faces around her, searching for allies, for someone brave enough to speak up, for any sign that this wasn't actually happening. Instead, she saw fear, compliance, the learned helplessness of students who'd been taught not to challenge authority, no matter how wrong that authority might be. "Where are you taking me?" Maya's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd, steady despite everything. Officer Loren didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Evan laughed, that sharp, cutting sound that bullies perfect over years of practice. "Probably county lockup," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's where troublemakers go. That's where you belong." But Maya wasn't a troublemaker. She was a 16-year-old girl whose only crime was refusing to shrink herself to make mediocre white boys comfortable. She was a daughter, a sister, a student with a future that was supposed to be bright and limitless. And in this moment, watching her rights evaporate in real time, she understood something profound about the world she lived in. The rules weren't the same for everyone. Justice wasn't blind. And sometimes the very people sworn to protect and serve were the greatest threat of all. The patrol car's door swung open with a heavy metallic groan. Officer Loren's hand pressed down on Maya's head, forcing her toward the back seat like she was dangerous, like she was the problem. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained carefully neutral. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't beg. She would remember every single detail of this moment, every face, every word, every abuse of power, because somewhere deep in her gut, she knew this wasn't over. This was just beginning. What would you do if you saw this happening in your school? Would you speak up, or would fear keep you silent? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because what happens next will test everything you think you know about courage. The patrol car pulled away from Brookwood High with Maya trapped in the back seat, her hands still cuffed, her mind racing through scenarios faster than her heart could keep pace. Through the reinforced window, she watched her new school shrink in the distance, becoming just another building, another place where she didn't belong. Officer Loren drove with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before, someone who'd never once questioned whether he was the hero or the villain of his own story. Evan sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing back at Maya with that same satisfied smirk. "You shouldn't have talked back," Evan said without looking up from his screen. "Dad doesn't like mouthy ones. Especially your kind." The casual racism hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Maya wanted to respond, to tear apart his ignorance with the eloquence she'd honed through years of debate competitions. But she'd learned something in the past 30 minutes. Words didn't matter when the person holding power had already decided you were guilty. So she stayed silent, cataloging everything, preparing for a battle she didn't even know she was about to win. Officer Loren turned onto Main Street, bypassing the direct route to the police station. Maya noticed immediately. Her father had taught her to always know where she was, to memorize routes and landmarks, to never let someone take you to a second location without knowing why. "This isn't the way to the station," she said, her voice cutting through the country music playing low on the radio. Officer Loren's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "We're making a stop first," he said, offering no further explanation. Evan grinned. "Dad likes to teach lessons before the paperwork starts." The car pulled into an empty parking lot behind an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town. Maya's pulse spiked. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't legal. This was the kind of moment that ended up on true crime documentaries, the kind of story that started with someone going missing and ended with a devastated family begging for answers. Officer Loren killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Evan turned around in his seat, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker, more predatory. "Now, we're going to have a real conversation," he said slowly. "About respect. If stories like this make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe where this goes next." Maya kept her breathing steady, her training kicking in despite the fear clawing at her insides. Her mother had prepared her for moments like this, not because they should happen, but because they do. "Whatever you're planning," Maya said clearly, "there are cameras in this car. Dashcam. Body cam. Everything you do is being recorded." It was a bluff. She had no idea if Officer Loren's equipment was actually running, but she said it with enough confidence to plant a seed of doubt. Officer Loren's jaw tightened. Evan hesitated, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. That hesitation was everything. It meant they hadn't thought this through completely. It meant there was still a crack in their armor, a way to exploit their arrogance. "Is that a threat?" Officer Loren asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No," Maya replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "It's a fact. And facts have a way of surfacing at the worst possible times, especially when federal investigators get involved." The mention of federal investigators changed the temperature in the car. Evan shifted uncomfortably. Officer Loren's hand rested on the door handle, but he didn't move. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his tone. Maya pressed her advantage. "My mother works in the legal system. I know exactly how investigations work. I know how complaints get filed. I know how patterns of misconduct get exposed. And I know that right now you've deviated from standard procedure, taken a minor to a secondary location without cause, and potentially violated about 6 different civil rights statutes." She was improvising, pulling from every legal drama she'd ever watched, every dinner table conversation about her mother's cases, every article she'd read about police reform. But she delivered it with the precision of a lawyer delivering a closing argument. Officer Loren stared at her through the mirror, reassessing. This wasn't the scared little girl he'd expected. This was someone who understood the game. Someone who might actually be dangerous. "We're taking you to the station," he finally said, starting the engine. The patrol car reversed out of the empty lot, back onto Main Street, back towards something resembling legality. Evan said nothing, staring out the window, his jaw clenched. Maya allowed herself one small, invisible moment of relief. She'd bought herself time. But time for what? She was still handcuffed, still technically under arrest, still at the mercy of a system that had shown her exactly how little her rights actually mattered. The police station loomed ahead, a squat brick building with narrow windows and the kind of institutional ugliness that government buildings seem to specialize in. Officer Loren pulled into the parking lot, this time following proper procedure, this time playing by the rules because Maya had reminded him those rules existed. But as they approached the entrance, Maya caught sight of something that made her heart stop. A familiar black sedan was parked in the visitors section. The license plate read Justice 7. Her mother's car. What were the chances? What cosmic timing had brought Judge Patricia Kingsley to this exact police station at this exact moment? Was it coincidence, or had someone from the school called her? Has word already spread? And most importantly, what would happen when Officer Loren walked his latest arrest through those doors and came face to face with the one person in the entire county who had the power to destroy his career with a single phone call? Judge Patricia Kingsley stood in the lobby of the Brookwood Police Station, her tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the faded institutional beige of the walls around her. She wasn't there by accident. 20 minutes earlier, her clerk had burst into her chambers with a tablet, hands shaking, pulling up a live video that a Brookwood High student had posted to social media. The footage was shaky, filmed through a classroom window, but the image was unmistakable. A black girl in a blue hoodie, hands cuffed behind her back, being shoved into a patrol car while a teenage boy in a Letterman jacket laughed. The caption read, "Officer Loren's son gets another one arrested. This school is wild." Patricia's blood had turned to ice the moment she recognized the blue hoodie. Maya had worn it that morning at breakfast. Her daughter, her brilliant, strong-willed, fiercely intelligent daughter, was somewhere in police custody, and Patricia had been sitting in her office reviewing case files, completely unaware. She'd made 3 phone calls in 90 seconds, one to her assistant to clear her schedule, one to the superintendent of Brookwood Schools demanding answers, and one to the police chief, her voice so cold it could freeze water. "If one hair on my daughter's head is harmed," she'd said with surgical precision, "I will personally audit every arrest your department has made in the past decade. Do you understand me?" Now she stood waiting, her exterior calm, but her interior a storm of fury and fear. The desk sergeant kept glancing at her nervously, clearly aware of who she was, clearly understanding that whatever was about to happen would have consequences that rippled far beyond this building. The station's main door swung open. Officer Loren entered first, his hand gripping the arm of a teenage girl whose face Patricia would recognize in the dark, across any distance, in any circumstance. Maya. Time seemed to slow. Patricia watched her daughter walk through that door, shoulders back despite the handcuffs, chin up despite the humiliation, eyes fierce despite the tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, Evan Loren swaggered in, still grinning, still oblivious. And behind him, Officer Loren pulled up short the moment he saw Judge Kingsley standing in the center of the lobby, her expression unreadable, her presence filling the entire room like a gathering storm. "What is this?" Patricia's voice cut through the ambient noise of radios and ringing phones. Every conversation in the station stopped. Every officer turned to look. Officer Loren's face went pale. Evan's grin evaporated like water on hot asphalt. Maya's eyes met her mother's, and something passed between them. Recognition, relief, vindication, and the absolute certainty that the power dynamic in this room had just shifted so dramatically it would leave scorch marks. Officer Loren tried to recover. "Judge Kingsley, I wasn't aware. You weren't aware that you just arrested my daughter." Patricia's words were precise, measured deadly. "You weren't aware that you removed a minor from school property without contacting her parents? You weren't aware that the girl you currently have in handcuffs, Officer Loren, on a 16-year-old with no criminal record, is the same girl whose mother has presided over 3 misconduct cases involving your precinct in the past 2 years. The silence in the station was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Evan looked at his father, confusion and dawning horror spreading across his face. The desk sergeant reached for a phone, presumably to call the chief. 2 other officers who'd been watching from the break room doorway quietly retreated. Everyone understood what they were witnessing. A career ending in real time, a house of cards beginning its inevitable collapse. Have you ever seen someone realize they've made a catastrophic mistake? That moment when their whole world shifts and they understand there's no going back? Tell me in the comments what you think should happen to Officer Loren, because the next few minutes are going to determine everything. There's been a misunderstanding, Officer Loren started, his voice strained. Patricia held up one hand, silencing him instantly. Remove those handcuffs for my daughter. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a command backed by the full weight of judicial authority, by years of legal expertise, by a mother's fury channeled through the framework of law. Officer Loren fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. Maya pulled her hands forward, rubbing her wrists where red marks were already forming. She didn't move toward her mother. Not yet. She stood her ground, watching both Lawrence with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and contempt. Patricia's eyes never left Officer Loren's face. What were the charges? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Officer Loren swallowed hard. Disorderly conduct. Disturbing the peace. Resisting. Stop. Patricia's single word carried the force of a gavel. My daughter was arrested for disorderly conduct at a school she attended for the first time today, within 90 minutes of arrival. And your son, she turned her gaze to Evan, who actually flinched. Your son just happened to be present for this arrest, riding along in your patrol car, participating in the detention of a minor? Do I have that correct? No one answered. The truth hung in the air, obvious and damning. Patricia pulled out her phone, never breaking eye contact with Officer Loren. I'm calling the district attorney. I'm calling internal affairs. I'm calling the State Board of Education. And then I'm calling every civil rights organization in this state, because what happened to my daughter today is what happens to black children across this country every single day, except most of them don't have a judge for a mother. Most of them don't have someone with the power to fight back. But Maya does. And I will burn down every structure that allowed this to happen. The station door opened again. This time it was Police Chief Marquez, his face grim, his presence commanding immediate attention. He took one look at the scene. Judge Kingsley standing like an avenging angel, Maya with fresh marks on her wrists, Officer Loren looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, and his jaw tightened. My office, he said to Officer Loren. Now. Then, turning to Patricia with respect that bordered on deference, Judge Kingsley, I sincerely apologize. This should never have happened. I'd like to speak with you and your daughter privately to understand exactly what occurred. Patricia nodded once. You'll get your chance, Chief. After I get my daughter out of this building, and after I hear her full account of what she experienced today. Then we'll talk about investigations, accountability, and systematic reform. In that order. She finally moved toward Maya, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Maya leaned into the touch, some of the tension draining from her frame. They walked toward the exit together, leaving chaos in their wake. But as they reached the door, Maya stopped and turned back. Her eyes found Evan, who stood frozen by the desk, looking smaller than he had just hours before in that hallway. You told me I didn't know my place, Maya said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the station. Turns out, my place is exactly where I decide it is. And people like you? You're about to learn that actions have consequences, even for people who thought they were untouchable. Then she walked out, her mother beside her, leaving Officer Loren to face the destruction of everything he'd built on a foundation of corruption and abuse. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded, to everyone remaining in that station, like the closing of a coffin lid. The afternoon sun felt different against Maya's skin as she stepped out of the police station, warmer, brighter, like the world itself had shifted on its axis. Her mother's hand remained on her shoulder, a grounding presence, a reminder that she wasn't alone, had never been alone, even in those moments when it felt like the entire system was designed to crush her. They walked to the black sedan in silence, the weight of the past few hours pressing down on both of them in different ways. Patricia unlocked the car, but didn't immediately get in. Instead, she turned to face her daughter fully. Tell me everything, Patricia said softly. Every detail, every word, every moment from the time you walked into that school until I saw you in handcuffs. So Maya did. She recounted the morning with the precision of someone who'd been trained to observe, to remember, to build cases from facts. The hallway collision, Evan's deliberate aggression, the racist taunts designed to provoke, The escalation when she refused to back down, refused to apologize for existing in a space that clearly resented her presence. The moment Evan pulled out his phone and called his father, summoning authority like a weapon. The humiliation of being cuffed in front of the entire school. Patricia listened without interrupting, but Maya could see the rage building behind her mother's carefully controlled expression. This wasn't just a judge hearing about injustice. This was a mother confronting the reality that her child had experienced the very thing she'd spent her entire career fighting against. When Maya finished, describing the detour to the abandoned warehouse and the implicit threat that hung in that empty parking lot, Patricia's hands clenched into fists. "He took you off route." Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper, but contained multitudes of fury. Maya nodded. "I think he was trying to scare me. Or worse. I mentioned cameras and federal investigations, and that's when he decided to follow protocol again." A bitter smile crossed Patricia's face, pride mixed with horror. "You talked your way out using legal theory." "I learned from the best," Maya replied simply. If you're watching this, and you feel that surge of satisfaction when bullies finally face consequences, subscribe now. This is about to get even more intense. They got into the car, but Patricia didn't start the engine immediately. She pulled out her phone and made a call that Maya could only hear one side of. "Martin, it's Patricia. I need you to file a formal complaint with Internal Affairs against Officer James Loren, badge number, hold on." She pulled up information on her screen. Badge number 2847. Charges include unlawful detention of a minor, racial profiling, deviation from standard arrest procedures, failure to notify parents or guardians, and intimidation. I'm also filing a separate civil rights lawsuit. I want every arrest he's made in the past 5 years reviewed for irregularities. Yes, this is personal. It's also justice. Get started immediately. The next call was to the school. Superintendent Wallace. "Judge Kingsley, we need to discuss the hostile environment at Brookwood High that led to my daughter being assaulted by another student and subsequently arrested without cause. I want Evan Loren suspended pending investigation. I want a full review of your security footage. And I want a meeting with your board of directors by the end of week to discuss systematic reforms to prevent this from happening to another child. This isn't negotiable." She hung up without waiting for a response. Maya watched her mother work with a mixture of awe and understanding. This was power, not the corrupt bullying power that Officer Loren and his son wielded, but the power of knowledge, of institutional authority used in service of justice, of a woman who knew every lever to pull and wasn't afraid to pull them all. "What happens now?" Maya asked quietly. Patricia turned to her, and for the first time that afternoon, her expression softened. Now we document everything. We take photos of those marks on your wrists. We get statements from students who witnessed the hallway incident. We build a case so airtight that no one can dismiss it, minimize it, or sweep it under the rug. And then we use your story to change policy, not just at Brookwood, but district-wide. Because you're right, baby. You're absolutely right. You weren't the problem today. The system was. And systems can be changed. Maya felt something release in her chest, a knot of fear and anger she'd been carrying since that first moment in the hallway. "What about Evan?" she asked. "What about kids like him who think they can do whatever they want because daddy has a badge?" Patricia's smile was sharp. Evan Loren is about to learn a very expensive lesson about accountability. His father's under investigation, which means his protection is gone. The school will have to act to avoid liability. And more importantly, the entire student body just watched his little power play backfire spectacularly. Bullies thrive on perceived invincibility. Once that perception shatters, they're just insecure kids with anger issues. The drive back to their house took 40 minutes, but it felt shorter. Patricia kept glancing at Maya, as if reassuring herself that her daughter was really okay, really there, really safe. Maya stared out the window, watching familiar streets roll by, processing the day with the kind of exhausted clarity that comes after adrenaline fades. She'd walked into Brookwood High that morning as the new girl, trying to blend in, trying to find her place. She was leaving as something else entirely, a catalyst, a symbol, a reminder that injustice doesn't always win, especially when the person being targeted refuses to be silent. "Mom," Maya said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yeah, honey. I don't want to go back to Brookwood." The words came out small, vulnerable, honest. Patricia turned off the engine and faced her daughter. You don't have to. We can enroll you somewhere else, somewhere safer, somewhere that deserves you. But Maya, she took her daughter's hand, I need you to know something. What happened today wasn't about you being in the wrong place. It was about them being the wrong people. You didn't fail. They did. And whether you go back or not, we're going to make sure this never happens to another student. Maya nodded, tears finally spilling over, all the emotion she'd held back in the station, and the car, and every moment since the handcuffs clicked shut, finally finding release. Patricia pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, right there in the front seat of the car, holding her the way she'd held her as a child after nightmares, as a toddler after falls, as a baby entering a world that wasn't always kind. I'm so proud of you, Patricia whispered. You were so strong, so smart, so brave. But you don't have to be strong right now. You can just be my daughter, and you can feel whatever you need to feel. They sat like that for a long time, mother and daughter, judge and teenager, two black women in a world that demanded they be perfect, unshakable, twice as good for half the recognition. Eventually they went inside. Patricia made tea. Maya changed out of the blue hoodie she'd never wear again. And together, they began the work of turning trauma into testimony, pain into power, one girl's nightmare into a wake-up call for an entire system. By 8 p.m. that evening, Maya's story had gone viral. The shaky cell phone footage from the school courtyard had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms, picking up momentum with each repost, each outrage comment, each hashtag demanding accountability. Hashtag Justice for Maya trended locally, then regionally, then exploded into national consciousness. News outlets picked up the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements. The ACLU offered legal support. Suddenly, what had felt like an isolated incident in a random suburban high school became a flashpoint in the larger conversation about police overreach, racial profiling, and the school-to-prison pipeline. Maya sat curled on the couch in her living room, scrolling through her phone with a mixture of validation and overwhelm. Strangers were defending her, sharing their own stories of discrimination and abuse, offering support and solidarity. But there were also the other comments, the ones questioning her story, suggesting she must have done something to deserve arrest, accusing her mother of pulling strings and playing the race card. The cruelty was casual, reflexive, a reminder that for every person willing to see injustice, there were others invested in denying it existed. Step away from the phone, Patricia said gently, settling beside her daughter with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Social media is a double-edged sword right now. Let it do its work without consuming yours. Maya locked her screen, but didn't put the phone down entirely. People are saying I'm making it up, she said quietly. They're saying Officer Loren was just doing his job. Patricia sighed. There will always be people who defend the system because acknowledging its flaws would force them to confront their own complicity. Don't let them take up space in your head. The doorbell rang. Patricia glanced at the security camera feed on her tablet and smiled. Your father's here. Maya's dad, Marcus Kingsley, was a civil rights attorney who'd been in depositions all day, unreachable until Patricia finally got through to him an hour ago with a summary that had sent him speeding across the city. He burst through the door with the energy of a man who'd moved mountains to get there, immediately crossing to Maya and wrapping her in the kind of hug that felt like a fortress. I'm so sorry I wasn't there, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have been reachable. I should have. Dad, it's okay, Maya interrupted, though her own voice cracked. Mom handled it. She was perfect. Marcus looked at his wife over their daughter's head, and something passed between them. Partnership, respect, shared fury at a world that had dared to threaten their child. I spoke with the DA, Marcus said, shifting into attorney mode even as he kept one arm around Maya. They're opening an investigation into Officer Loren's arrest record. Preliminary review shows a pattern: disproportionate arrests of Black and Latino students, excessive use of force complaints, multiple civil settlements paid out quietly by the city. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern of behavior that's been enabled for years. What would you do with that information? Would you push for criminal charges, civil lawsuits, or both? Drop your take in the comments, because the legal strategy here is about to get complicated. Patricia leaned forward. We need to be strategic. If we push too hard, too fast, they'll close ranks and protect their own. But if we build the case methodically and involve the right oversight bodies, we can force systematic change, not just individual accountability. Marcus nodded. Agreed. I'm also thinking about the school. Evan Loren assaulted Maya in that hallway before any of this escalated. We have witnesses. We potentially have security footage. That's battery, harassment, and creating a hostile educational environment. The school has liability. Maya listened to her parents discuss legal strategy with the practiced efficiency of two people who'd spent their careers dismantling injustice one case at a time. Part of her felt protected, grateful for parents with the knowledge and resources to fight back. But another part felt the weight of becoming a symbol, a case study, a hashtag. She didn't want to be justice for Maya. She just wanted to be Maya, a teenage girl who liked debate teams and historical fiction and terrible reality TV shows. A girl who should have been worried about making friends at her new school, not whether she'd be arrested for existing. What do you want, baby girl? Marcus asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. This is your story, your trauma, your choice about how we proceed. We can go nuclear, or we can handle this quietly. We can make you the face of a movement, or we can protect your privacy and work behind the scenes. What do you need? Maya considered the question seriously. What did she need? Justice, obviously. Accountability. But more than that, she needed the next black girl who walked into Brookwood High, or any school, to not experience what she'd experienced. She needed Evan Loren and kids like him to understand that power without accountability was just tyranny with a permission slip. I want to tell my story, Maya said finally. But on my terms. I want to speak at that school board meeting. I want to look them in the eyes and make them hear what happened. And I want every student at Brookwood to know exactly who protected a bully and who stood by while injustice happened. Then I want to transfer to a different school and never look back. But I won't let them forget. I won't let this be buried. Her parents exchanged glances, pride evident in both their expressions. Then that's what we'll do, Patricia said firmly. The rest of the evening was spent preparing. Marcus pulled out a legal pad and began outlining testimony. Patricia contacted journalists she trusted, setting up interviews that would control the narrative before it controlled them. Maya drafted her own account of the day, writing with the kind of raw honesty that would make people uncomfortable, which was exactly the point. Comfortable people didn't change systems. Discomfort was the catalyst for transformation. Around midnight, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, assuming it was another troll from the viral video. But curiosity won. The message was short. I was there today. In the hallway. I should have said something. I'm sorry I didn't. You were brave. Jenna. Maya stared at the text for a long moment. She didn't know who Jenna was and didn't recognize the number. But the message mattered. It was the first crack in the wall of silence, the first witness stepping forward, the first domino that would lead to others. She showed the text to her parents. Marcus immediately added Jenna to the list of potential witnesses. Patricia made a note to have their investigator reach out. And Maya typed back a simple response, "Thank you for speaking up now." That takes courage too. Because it did. Standing up in the moment was heroic, but standing up after the fact, admitting complicity in silence, choosing to be part of the solution, that mattered too. Every person who found the courage to speak truth chipped away at the foundation of injustice. By the time Maya finally went to bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, the wheels of justice were already turning. Investigations were launched. Witnesses were coming forward. The story that began with a shoulder check in a hallway was becoming something much larger, a reckoning that was long overdue. 3 days later, Maya stood before the Brookwood School District Board of Directors in a conference room packed beyond capacity. Students filled the seats, lined the walls, spilled into the hallway outside. Parents clutched printed copies of the viral video. Teachers sat with expressions ranging from shame to solidarity. Local news cameras captured every moment. And at the back of a room, arms crossed and face unreadable, sat Officer James Loren, currently suspended pending investigation, but still allowed to attend public meetings. Evan was conspicuously absent. Superintendent Wallace sat at the center of the board's long table, flanked by 6 directors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. To his left, the district's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. To his right, a PR consultant typed frantically on a laptop. They'd prepared for a scandal. What they got was a reckoning. Maya approached the podium with her parents behind her, a wall of support and legal firepower. She'd practiced her statement a dozen times, but now, facing the crowd and the cameras and the people who'd failed her, the rehearsed words felt insufficient. "My name is Maya Kingsley," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "4 days ago, I walked into Brookwood High for my first day as a new student. I was nervous but excited. I had a schedule, a backpack full of new notebooks, and the kind of hope that every teenager deserves to feel about their education. By lunchtime, I was in handcuffs being paraded in front of my peers like a criminal, arrested for the crime of refusing to apologize when a student assaulted me and used racial slurs to intimidate me." The room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Maya continued, her gaze moving across the faces in front of her. "Evan Loren shoved me in a hallway. He called me slurs. He kicked my belongings across the floor. And when I stood up for myself, when I refused to shrink or submit or disappear, he called his father, a police officer who arrived at the school within minutes, without following protocol, without contacting my parents, without any justification beyond his son's wounded ego. I was arrested not for breaking the law, but for challenging a power structure that expected me to know my place." Subscribe if you believe every student deserves to walk into school without fear of abuse. What comes next will restore your faith in courage. "I want to be clear about something," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "This isn't just about one bad cop or one racist bully. This is about systems. This is about a school that allowed Evan Loren to terrorize students for years because his father had a badge. This is about teachers who look the other way. This is about administrators who prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting vulnerable students. This is about a culture that told me I was the problem for refusing to accept abuse." She pulled out a stack of papers. "Since my story went public, 63 students have contacted me or my parents with their own experiences at this school. 63. Stories of racism, harassment, assault, and intimidation that were ignored, minimized, or blamed on the victims. Students who were told to not make waves or try to get along, or understand that boys will be boys. This isn't an isolated incident. This is institutional failure." Superintendent Wallace shifted uncomfortably. One of the board directors leaned forward. "Ms. Kingsley, we take these allegations very seriously, and we're conducting a thorough review." A review. Maya's interruption was sharp. "You're conducting a review. The same way you reviewed the 3 previous complaints against Evan Loren and determined no action was necessary? The same way you reviewed security footage of harassment in hallways and decided it was just teenagers being teenagers? Your reviews are part of the problem." The board director sat back, chastened. Patricia placed a supportive hand on Maya's shoulder, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Maya took a breath and continued, "I'm not here asking for apologies or platitudes. I'm here demanding change. Concrete, measurable, enforceable change. I'm demanding that Evan Loren be expelled. I'm demanding that security footage from the past 2 years be reviewed by an independent third party to identify patterns of harassment. I'm demanding mandatory implicit bias training for all staff. I'm demanding a student-led oversight committee with real power to investigate complaints. And I'm demanding that this board publicly acknowledge that what happened to me was a failure of every system designed to protect students." The room erupted in applause. Students stood, some crying, some cheering, all united in a moment of collective catharsis. Superintendent Wallace banged a gavel, calling for order, but the energy in the room was undeniable. Maya had given voice to years of silence pain, and now that voice echoed off every wall. Officer Loren stood abruptly and left the room, his departure noticed by every eye that tracked him with a mixture of satisfaction and contempt. For the next 2 hours, student after student approached the podium to share their stories. A Latina girl described Evan cornering her in a stairwell and threatening her when she rejected his advances. A black sophomore recounted being called slurs and having his backpack searched without cause by school security at Officer Loren's request. An Asian student detailed racist taunts that teachers overheard but never addressed. The pattern was undeniable. The failure was systemic, and the board could no longer hide behind ignorance. By the end of the meeting, the board had committed, on record, in front of cameras, to every demand Maya had outlined. Evan Loren was officially expelled. An independent investigation was launched. Policy changes were drafted. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough to undo the harm. But it was a start. It was accountability. It was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless. As Maya left the building, students she never met stopped her to say thank you, to share their own stories, to express gratitude that someone had finally spoken up and been heard. One girl handed her a folded note that simply read, "You saved my little brother from going through what I went through. Thank you." Maya folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket, a reminder of why discomfort and courage and speaking truth mattered. Her parents walked on either side of her to the car, a unit, a family, a force. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked. Maya considered the question. "Tired," she admitted, "but good. Like maybe something actually changed." Marcus smiled. "Something did change. You changed it. One voice, speaking truth, refusing to be silenced. That's how every movement starts." And as they drove away from Brookwood High for the last time, Maya believed him. Officer James Loren sat across from internal affairs investigators in a small, windowless room that smelled like stale coffee and institutional cleaning products. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd conducted interrogations in rooms exactly like this one, sat on the other side of the table asking questions designed to catch inconsistencies, to expose lies, to break down defenses. Now he was the subject. Now his career, his reputation, his entire identity was under the microscope he'd once wielded against others. The lead investigator, a woman named Detective Reyes, spread photographs across the table. "Officer Loren, can you explain why your arrest record shows a disproportionate targeting of minority juveniles?" Her voice was neutral, professional, but the question landed like a punch. Loren stared at the photos, faces of teenagers he'd arrested over the years, mostly black and brown kids, their expressions ranging from defiance to fear. "I patrol the areas where crime is highest," he said carefully. "The demographics reflect the neighborhoods." "Interesting," Detective Reyes replied, pulling out another document. "Because according to actual crime statistics, the neighborhoods you patrol have similar incident rates to predominantly white areas of the district. Yet your arrest rate for black juveniles is 400% higher than your colleagues' average. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Loren's jaw tightened. He was being boxed in, confronted with data that didn't lie, patterns that revealed what he'd always denied, that his policing wasn't objective, wasn't fair, wasn't just. It was biased, selective, and punitive in ways that disproportionately harmed the most vulnerable. The interrogation continued for 3 hours. Every arrest was questioned. Every use of force report was scrutinized. Every complaint that had been quietly settled or dismissed was reopened. The picture that emerged was damning, a pattern of abuse that had been overlooked because Loren was efficient, because he closed cases, because questioning him would have meant acknowledging that the system itself was broken. But Maya's case had changed the equation. Her story had brought media attention, public outcry, and the kind of scrutiny that couldn't be swept under the rug. By the end of the day, Officer James Loren was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of both the internal investigation and the criminal inquiry that was running parallel. His badge and service weapon were confiscated. His access to department systems was revoked. And his future, the career he'd built over 2 decades, the identity he'd wrapped around authority and power, hung in the balance, dependent on findings he already knew would not be favorable. Have you ever watched someone's entire world crumble because they thought the rules didn't apply to them? Share your thoughts below on whether justice is being truly served. Meanwhile, across town, Evan Loren sat in a very different kind of interrogation. His mother, Grace Loren, had remained silent for days after the school board meeting, processing the shame and horror of seeing her son exposed as a bully, her husband revealed as corrupt. Now, in their living room, with family photos lining the walls, she finally spoke. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long have you been terrorizing other students?" Evan stared at the floor. "Mom, it's not like that. I was just, don't lie to me," Grace interrupted, her voice sharp. "I sat in that meeting. I heard those stories. I saw the footage. Don't you dare lie to me." Evan's defenses crumbled. The tears came, genuine and ugly, the kind of crying that happens when someone's carefully constructed self-image shatters. "I thought I was untouchable," he admitted. "Dad always said we were better than them, that some people needed to be kept in line, that it was our job to maintain order." Grace closed her eyes, the realization settling over her like ash. Her husband hadn't just corrupted himself. He'd corrupted their son, passed down his toxic worldview like an inheritance of hatred. "You're transferring schools," Grace said firmly. "Somewhere far from here, where no one knows your name. You're going to therapy, real therapy, with someone who specializes in deprogramming racist ideology. And you're going to spend the next year volunteering with civil rights organizations, listening to the voices you spent years trying to silence. That's not optional. That's the only path forward where you become someone I can be proud of instead of someone I'm ashamed of." Evan looked up, tears streaming down his face. "What if I can't change?" he whispered. "Then you'll become exactly like your father," Grace replied. "And that terrifies me more than anything else in this world." It was the first step, not redemption, not forgiveness, but the beginning of accountability. Whether Evan would actually change remained to be seen. But at least now, someone in his life was demanding better of him, refusing to enable the behavior that had been normalized for far too long. Back at the Kingsley home, Maya was making her own decisions about the future. She enrolled at Jefferson Prep, a private school 30 minutes away, with a strong academic program, and more importantly, a demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion. Her parents had offered to stay at Brookwood, to fight until the culture changed, but Maya had chosen differently. "I need to be somewhere I can just be a student," she'd explained. "Somewhere I'm not a symbol or a case study. Somewhere I can breathe." Her first day at Jefferson Prep was the opposite of her first day at Brookwood. Students smiled. Teachers welcomed her warmly. No one shoved her in hallways or questioned her right to exist in that space. It felt surreal, almost suspicious. Was this how school was supposed to feel? Safe, inclusive, normal? A girl named Amara sat next to her in the first period and immediately struck up a conversation about the book they were reading in English. By lunch, Maya had been invited to join the debate team and the student government. By the end of the day, she'd exchanged numbers with 3 potential friends. "How was it?" Patricia asked when she picked Maya up that afternoon. Maya considered the question, searching for the right words. "It was good," she said finally. "Really good. And that makes me sad." Patricia glanced over, confused. "Sad? Why?" "Because this is how every school should feel," Maya explained. "Safe. Welcome. A place where learning is the priority instead of survival. The fact that this feels exceptional instead of normal means that what happened at Brookwood is happening everywhere. And most of the kids experiencing it don't have parents with law degrees and judicial power. They just suffer through it." Patricia's expression softened with understanding. "So, what are you going to do about it?" It was a genuine question, not a challenge. Maya was quiet for a moment, then smiled slowly. "I'm going to write about it. Document everything. Create a resource for students facing similar situations, what their rights are, how to report abuse, how to build cases. And I'm going to speak. At schools, at conferences, anywhere people will listen. Because my story ended with accountability. But it shouldn't be exceptional. It should be the bare minimum." That evening, Maya started a blog. She titled it "Know Your Place," a deliberate reclamation of the phrase Evan had used to demean her. The first post told her story in full, unfiltered detail. The second post outlined legal rights for students. The third post featured an interview with her mother about how to identify abuse of power. Within a week, the blog had 10,000 views. Within a month, 50,000. Maya had transformed her trauma into a tool for others, her pain into a platform for change. And somewhere across town, in a house growing quieter each day, as the weight of consequences settled in, Evan Loren read that blog with tears streaming down his face, confronting for the first time the full magnitude of the harm he'd caused. Whether those tears would lead to genuine transformation or just self-pity remained to be seen. But at least he could no longer pretend the harm didn't exist. At least he could no longer hide from the truth. 6 months after the incident, the Brookwood School District released its independent investigation findings. The report was 97 pages of meticulously documented failure, patterns of discrimination, inadequate staff training, insufficient reporting mechanisms, and a culture that prioritized reputation over student safety. The superintendent was placed on administrative leave. 3 assistant principals were reassigned. Security protocols were completely overhauled. And most significantly, the district entered into a consent decree with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, mandating regular audits and oversight for the next 5 years. Officer James Lauren's fate was decided in a courtroom packed with spectators. The criminal investigation had uncovered enough evidence of civil rights violations, falsification of reports, and abuse of authority to warrant charges. His attorney argued for leniency, pointing to 20 years of service, commendations, community involvement. But the prosecution presented testimony from 17 individuals, teenagers whose lives had been derailed by false arrests, families bankrupted by legal fees fighting bogus charges, communities traumatized by aggressive policing that targeted them based on race rather than actual criminal behavior. The judge, not Patricia, who had recused herself to avoid any appearance of conflict, listened impassively before delivering a verdict that rippled through law enforcement communities nationwide. Officer James Lauren was found guilty on 4 counts of civil rights violations and 2 counts of official misconduct. Sentence: 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release and permanent prohibition from any law enforcement position. Additionally, he was ordered to pay restitution to families who'd incurred legal fees defending against his improper arrests. As Lauren was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same handcuffs he'd placed on Maya and countless others, the symmetry was not lost on anyone present. He'd spent his career wielding power without accountability. Now he was experiencing the other side of that equation, the side he dismissed as deserving whatever punishment came its way. Justice, when it finally arrived, was both vindicating and sobering. It couldn't undo the harm, couldn't restore the years stolen from families, couldn't erase the trauma. But it could set a precedent. It could send a message. Maya attended the sentencing hearing, sitting between her parents in the second row. She felt a complex mix of emotions watching Lauren's conviction: satisfaction that accountability had been enforced, sadness that it had taken so much pain to get there, resolve that this couldn't be the end of the conversation. After the hearing, reporters surrounded the Kingsley family outside the courthouse. Microphones thrust forward. Questions overlapped. Patricia handled most of the media attention with practiced ease, but Maya stepped forward when asked what she wanted people to take away from the verdict. "This isn't about revenge," Maya said clearly, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This is about systemic change." Officer Lauren was one person, but he operated within a system that protected and enabled him for years. The real question is, how many other Officer Laurents are out there? How many other students are experiencing abuse right now in schools and communities that don't have the resources or visibility to fight back? This verdict matters, but it's just one step. The work of building better systems, training better officers, creating safer schools, that work continues. If Maya's words resonate with you, if you believe accountability is just the beginning, hit that subscribe button. The final chapter of this story will challenge everything. In the weeks following the verdict, Maya became an unlikely voice in national conversations about police reform and school safety. She testified before state legislative committees considering new laws around police interactions with minors. She spoke at education conferences about creating inclusive environments. She partnered with civil rights organizations to develop training materials. And through it all, she remained a teenager, attending Jefferson Prep, competing in debate tournaments, stressing about college applications, hanging out with friends. How do you balance it all? Amara asked one afternoon as they studied for AP History in Maya's living room. The advocacy work, the media attention, just being a normal kid. Maya considered the question. "I don't balance it perfectly," she admitted. "Sometimes I'm exhausted. Sometimes I just want to disappear and not think about racism or injustice or trauma. But then I get emails from students who use the resources on my blog to report abuse at their schools. Or I hear about policy changes that happened because someone heard me speak and decided to act differently. And I remember why it matters." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "You're going to change the world. You know that, right?" Maya laughed, a genuine sound that had become more frequent as time passed. "I'm going to try." But I can't do it alone. That's the thing everyone misses about movements. They don't happen because one person is extraordinary. They happen because ordinary people decide they've had enough and commit to doing something about it. I'm just one voice. But every voice that joins, every person who refuses to stay silent, every ally who uses their privilege to amplify marginalized voices, that's how systems change. Meanwhile, Evan Loren was navigating his own complicated journey. Transferred to a private school 2 hours away, he'd spent the past 6 months in intensive therapy, confronting the racist ideology he'd absorbed and perpetuated. His therapist had given him an assignment: write a letter of accountability to every student he'd harmed. Not an apology seeking forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of harm and a commitment to doing better. The exercise was excruciating, forcing Evan to confront actions he justified or dismissed for years. One of those letters was addressed to Maya. He'd written and rewritten it dozens of times, never satisfied that words could adequately capture the magnitude of his failure. Finally, he sent it, not through social media or the blog, but through his therapist, who contacted the Kingsleys' family attorney to ensure it was appropriate. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Patricia opened it, read it carefully, then handed it to Maya, without comment. Maya read Evan's words slowly. He didn't make excuses. He didn't minimize what he'd done. He simply acknowledged the harm, the assault, the racism, the abuse of his father's power, and stated plainly that he was working to become someone different, someone better, someone who used privilege to dismantle systems of oppression rather than reinforce them. He asked for nothing in return. He didn't request forgiveness or absolution. He simply stated that he would spend the rest of his life trying to repair the harm he'd caused. Maya set the letter down and stared out the window for a long time. "What are you thinking?" Patricia asked gently. "I'm thinking," Maya said slowly, "that accountability looks different than I expected. I don't forgive him. I'm not sure I ever will. But I believe he's trying to change. And maybe that's enough. Not for us to be friends or for me to absolve him, but enough for him to become someone who doesn't perpetuate the same harm. Enough for him to use his story to teach other kids what not to become." Patricia nodded. "That's wisdom beyond your years." Maya smiled sadly. "I learned it the hard way." But there was truth in the statement: growth born from trauma, wisdom forged in fire. Maya had been forced to mature faster than any teenager should have to. But rather than letting that experience harden her into bitterness, she'd transformed it into empathy, into understanding, into a commitment to justice that was both fierce and compassionate. As the sun set that evening, casting golden light across the living room, Maya returned to her laptop and began drafting her next blog post. This one would be about accountability versus forgiveness, about how victims don't owe their abusers absolution, but how watching someone genuinely try to change can coexist with maintaining boundaries. It was a nuanced take in a world that preferred simple narratives, but Maya had learned that real justice was rarely simple. It was complicated, messy, ongoing, a process rather than a destination. And across town, in his own small room far from the throne of privilege he'd once occupied, Evan Loren read Maya's blog post when it went live the next morning. He cried again, not the self-pitying tears of someone facing consequences, but the tears of someone beginning to understand the weight of harm caused, the long road to redemption, and the knowledge that some things can't be fixed, only learned from. It was the beginning. Not of friendship or reconciliation, but of transformation. And sometimes that was the most justice anyone could hope for. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Maya stood on the stage of a TEDx event in downtown Seattle, looking out at an audience of nearly 2,000 people. The lights were bright, the pressure immense, but she'd learned to channel nervousness into purpose. Her talk was titled "The Day I Was Arrested for Standing Up: What One Teenager's Story Reveals About Justice in America." She'd practiced it dozens of times, refining every word, every pause, every emotional beat. Now, at this moment, it was time to deliver. "I want to start with a question," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "What would you do if the system designed to protect you was the same system trying to destroy you?" The audience leaned in, hooked immediately. For the next 18 minutes, Maya walked them through her story, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as an analyst dissecting a system, a storyteller revealing universal truths through personal experience. She talked about the intersection of race, power, and privilege. She discussed how abuse of authority thrives in environments that prioritize order over justice. But the most powerful moment came near the end, when Maya shifted from her own story to the broader implications. "My story had a relatively happy ending," she said. "I had parents with resources, with knowledge, with power. But for every story like mine that gets media attention, there are thousands that don't. Thousands of black and brown kids who experience the exact same abuse without cameras, without viral videos, without judges from others. Those kids bear the consequences: criminal records, trauma, interrupted educations, while the system that failed them continues operating unchanged." She paused, letting the weight of that reality settle over the audience. "So here's what I'm asking you to do. Don't just be outraged by stories like mine when they go viral. Be outraged by the systems that create these stories in the first place. Vote for school board members who prioritize student safety over reputation. Support police accountability measures in your cities. Listen when young people tell you about their experiences instead of dismissing them as exaggeration. Use whatever privilege you have, racial, economic, social, to amplify voices that are being silenced. Because justice isn't a moment. It's a practice. It's a daily choice to create a world where kids like me don't have to fight this hard just to be treated with basic dignity." The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. But what mattered more to Maya were the conversations afterward, educators asking how to implement better reporting systems, police officers requesting training resources, students sharing their own stories, and asking for advice. The talk would eventually be viewed over 3 million times online, translated into 16 languages, and used in college courses on race and justice. But in that moment, in that venue, it was simply a connection, human beings recognizing shared humanity, committing to do better. Tell me honestly, has a story ever changed the way you see the world? Drop a comment about a time you were forced to confront uncomfortable truths. 3 months later, Maya received an unexpected invitation. The Brookwood School District, under entirely new leadership following the administrative overhaul, wanted to establish a scholarship in her name, the Maya Kingsley Courage Award, given annually to a student who demonstrated exceptional bravery in standing up against injustice. The district also wanted to rename the school's Civil Rights and Social Justice Club after her. Maya's initial reaction was skepticism. "They want to honor me at the school that traumatized me," she asked her parents incredulously. But Patricia offered a different perspective. "They want to acknowledge their failure and commit to doing better. By naming a scholarship after you, they're telling every future student that the institution values courage over compliance, that speaking up is rewarded rather than punished. You get to decide if that narrative shift is genuine or performative. But if it's genuine, it could change lives." Maya thought about it for a week before agreeing to meet with the new superintendent, Dr. Rahman. Dr. Rahman was everything Superintendent Wallace hadn't been: transparent, accountable, genuinely committed to reform. "I won't insult you by apologizing on behalf of people who aren't here to apologize for themselves," she said when they met in her office. "What happened to you is unconscionable. The systems that failed you were broken long before you arrived and continued being broken long after you left. But I want you to know what's changed." She pulled out a detailed report showing the reforms implemented over the past year. The changes were substantial. New anonymous reporting systems for harassment and discrimination. Mandatory training for all staff on implicit bias and trauma-informed discipline. A student oversight committee with real power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Partnerships with civil rights organizations to audit policies and practices. Most significantly, a fundamental shift in culture from prioritizing order and reputation to prioritizing student well-being and equity. "I can't guarantee we'll never fail a student again," Dr. Rahman admitted. "But I can guarantee we're building systems designed to catch and correct failures quickly, transparently, and with accountability." Maya listened carefully, examining the data, asking pointed questions, pushing back on vague promises. Finally, she agreed, not to return to Brookwood as a student, but to partner with the district on the scholarship program and to occasionally speak to students about advocacy and justice. "I want the scholarship recipients to meet with me," Maya specified. "I want to mentor them, support them, remind them that courage shouldn't be rare. And I want the scholarship announcement to include my full story, not a sanitized version, but the truth about what happened, why it was wrong, and what changed as a result." Dr. Rahman agreed to every term. The Maya Kingsley Courage Award was established with a $10,000 annual scholarship funded through a combination of district resources and private donations. The first recipient was a junior named Marcus Chun, who'd organized a successful campaign to remove a staff member who'd repeatedly made homophobic comments in class. Maya met with Marcus over coffee, listening to his story, offering guidance, and seeing in him the same fire she'd felt a year earlier, the refusal to accept injustice, even when fighting it was difficult and lonely. "Does it get easier?" Marcus asked. Maya considered the question honestly. "Not really," she admitted. "Fighting injustice is exhausting, especially when you're young, and people dismiss you or tell you you're too sensitive or too angry or too much. But here's what I've learned. You don't fight because it's easy. You fight because it's necessary. And every small victory, every policy changed, every abuser held accountable, every student who feels safer because he spoke up, those victories compound. You're not alone in this fight. You never were." As Maya drove home that evening, she reflected on how much had changed in a year. Officer Loren was in prison. Evan was in therapy, reportedly making genuine progress. Brookwood had implemented comprehensive reforms. Her blog had become a resource used by thousands of students and educators. She'd spoken at conferences, influenced legislation, and connected with activists doing similar work across the country. But perhaps most importantly, she'd reclaimed her own narrative, refusing to be defined by the trauma, instead using it as fuel for transformation. That night, Maya updated her blog with a post titled 1 year later, Reflections on Justice and Healing. She wrote about the complexity of moving forward while carrying trauma, about the difference between forgiveness and accountability, about the importance of building systems that prevent harm rather than just punishing it after the fact, and about the unexpected ways pain could transform into purpose when channeled intentionally. The post ended with a challenge to her readers. What injustice are you tolerating because fighting it feels too hard? What change could you create if you decided to speak up instead of staying silent? You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to start. Because every movement begins with one person deciding they've had enough, and I'm betting that person could be you. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments, people sharing their own stories of standing up, of staying silent and regretting it, of feeling inspired to try again. And somewhere in those comments, buried among the encouragement and solidarity, was one from an anonymous user that simply read, "Thank you for not giving up on me. I'm trying to be better." Ele. Maya saw it, read it, and after a long moment of consideration, clicked approve, allowing the comment to be visible. Not because she forgave him. Not because they were friends, but because accountability was an ongoing process, and maybe, just maybe, the world needed to see that even people who caused harm could choose to become part of the solution. That was the hardest kind of hope, the kind that required tremendous courage to extend. But it was also the kind that might actually change things. 2 years after the incident, Maya Kingsley stood in her childhood bedroom, packing boxes for college. She'd been accepted to Columbia University with a full scholarship, planning to study political science and law, following in her mother's footsteps, but carving her own path. The walls of her room were covered with mementos from the journey, photos from speaking engagements, printed articles about policy changes her advocacy had influenced, letters from students who'd used her resources to fight injustice at their own schools. Each item told a story of transformation, of pain turned into purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from Amara. "Can't believe you're actually leaving. Who's going to keep me grounded?" Maya smiled, typing back, "You'll be fine. And NYC is only a plane ride away." But she felt the weight of leaving too, leaving the community she'd built, the family who'd supported her through everything, the familiar spaces that had witnessed her growth from traumatized teenager to national advocate. Growth required leaving sometimes. It required stepping into unknown territory with nothing but conviction and courage. Patricia knocked softly before entering the room. "Are you ready?" she asked, surveying the half-packed boxes. Maya nodded. "Almost. Just trying to decide what to take and what to leave behind." Patricia understood the metaphor beneath the practical question. "You take what serves you," she said gently. "The lessons, the strength, the relationships that matter. You leave behind the pain that's been processed, the anger that's been transformed, the version of yourself that needed this particular chapter to close before the next one could begin. They sat together on Maya's bed, surrounded by the physical evidence of a journey neither had anticipated. Do you ever regret it? Maya asked suddenly, standing up that day in the hallway, refusing to apologize when it could have ended differently. Patricia's answer was immediate. Never. Not for a single second. You could have made yourself smaller, safer, more palatable. But then you wouldn't be you. You'd be whoever the world demanded you become to avoid conflict. And that's not living. That's surviving. You chose to live. The doorbell rang. Marcus, Maya's dad, returning from a final errand before the family drove Maya to the airport. But there was someone with him. Through the window, Maya saw a figure she hadn't expected to see again. Evan Loren, looking older, carrying a carefully wrapped package. Maya's first instinct was to refuse the meeting. Patricia saw the conflict on her daughter's face. Your choice entirely, she said firmly. You don't owe him anything, not your time, not your attention, not closure. If you want him to leave, say the word. Maya took a breath, considering. Then, surprising herself, she said, I'll talk to him. Outside. 5 minutes. She walked downstairs and out to the front porch, where Evan stood nervously, clearly aware he was treading on sacred ground. He looked different, thinner, more serious, with none of the arrogant confidence that had once defined him. I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, Evan began. And I'm not here asking for anything. I just wanted to give you this before you left. He handed her the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal with high-quality paper, the kind serious writers used. I know you have a blog, and I've heard you're working on a book, Evan said. I thought maybe you could use this. And inside I wrote something. Not for you to read right now. Maybe never, if that's what you want. But I needed to document everything I did wrong. Everyone I hurt, and everyone I've tried to make amends to. It's my accountability record. And your name is on the first page because you're the person who forced me to confront what I'd become. If you've made it this far, if Maya's journey has meant something to you, subscribe. Because the ending will leave you thinking for days. Maya held the journal but didn't open it. Why now, she asked. Because you're leaving, and I might never get another chance, Evan replied honestly. And because I wanted you to know that the person I was that day in the hallway, he doesn't exist anymore. I destroyed him. I'm building someone new, someone who uses privilege to fight systems of oppression instead of perpetuating them. I volunteer with criminal justice reform organizations. I mentor kids who are at risk of falling into the same racist patterns I did. I'm studying social work because I want to spend my life repairing the kind of harm I caused. None of that erases what I did, but maybe it means something that I'm trying. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. It means something, she finally said. Not forgiveness. I'm still not there, and I don't know if I'll ever be. But it means something that you're doing the work without expecting absolution. That's what real accountability looks like. Evan nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you for saying that. And Maya, thank you for not backing down that day. You saved me from becoming my father. I just wish it hadn't cost you so much. He left without asking for anything else. No hug, no promise of future friendship, no redemption narrative that tied everything up with a neat bow. Just an acknowledgement of harm and a commitment to do better. Maya watched him go, then opened the journal to the first page. There, in careful handwriting, Evan had written, Maya Kingsley, the person who taught me that courage means standing up even when the entire system is designed to make you fall. I'm sorry for every moment of pain I caused. I'm committed to spending my life making sure no one else experiences what you did because of people like who I used to be. Maya closed the journal and went back inside where her family was waiting. You okay? Marcus asked. Yeah, Maya said, and she meant it. I am okay. That evening, as the family sat down for their last dinner before Maya's departure, Patricia raised her glass. A toast, she said, to Maya, who walked into a hallway as a nervous new student and walked out as a warrior for justice, who transformed trauma into triumph, pain into purpose, victimization into victory. We are so proud of the woman you've become. They clinked glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by love and support and the certainty that she'd done something that mattered, Maya felt a sense of completeness. Not closure. Justice work never had neat endings. But completion of a chapter, readiness for whatever came next. She'd started as a girl who just wanted to fit in. She'd become a voice that refused to be silenced. And now she was stepping into a future where she would continue fighting, but on her own terms, with her own power, in her own way. At the airport the next morning, saying goodbye to her parents was harder than expected. "You've got this," Patricia whispered, hugging her daughter tightly. "You've already faced the hardest thing. Everything else is just showing up and doing the work." Marcus added, "Make us proud. But more importantly, make yourself proud." Maya boarded the plane with her carry-on bag, her laptop, and Evan's journal tucked carefully in her backpack. As the plane lifted off, she looked out the window at her city shrinking below, all the places that held memory, trauma, growth, triumph. Somewhere down there, Officer James Loren was serving his sentence, confronting the consequences of decades of corruption. Somewhere, Evan was in class, learning to be better. Somewhere, students were using resources Maya had created to fight their own battles for justice. Somewhere, systems were changing because people had refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. And up here, 30,000 feet above ground, Maya Kingsley was opening her laptop and beginning to write the book that would tell her story, not as a victim's testimony, but as a blueprint for transformation. The first line came easily. "I learned about justice the day I was arrested for refusing to apologize for existing." From there, the words flowed, a story of pain and power, of systems and resistance, of one teenager who stood up when standing up was dangerous and refused to sit back down. It would be a bestseller. It would be taught in classrooms. It would inspire a generation of young activists who needed to know that their voices mattered, that their courage could change things, that justice was possible even when the system was broken. But in that moment, on that plane, heading toward a future she'd earned through resilience and refusal, Maya wasn't thinking about impact or legacy. She was thinking about the girl in the blue hoodie, standing in that hallway, making the split-second decision not to shrink, not to apologize, not to accept that someone else's hatred got to define her reality. That girl had been so scared, but she'd been so brave. And every victory since has started with that single moment of courage. As the plane broke through the clouds into the clear sky, Maya smiled and kept writing. Because this was what justice looked like, not a single verdict or moment of accountability, but a continuous practice of showing up, speaking truth, refusing to accept the unacceptable, and building, word by word and action by action, the world you wanted to see. It was hard work. It was lifelong work. But it was the only work that truly mattered. And somewhere in that work, in that commitment, in that refusal to let injustice have the final word, Maya had found not just justice, but something even more powerful, herself. What would you fight for if you knew the whole world was watching? What injustice are you tolerating right now because speaking up feels too hard? Maya's story is over, but yours is just beginning. The question is, what will you do with it?